we're going to shift our emergency preparedness summit focus now to critical infrastructure and funding for critical infrastructure. Of course, infrastructure is another hot topic of the day, especially given a lot of what we've had moving legislatively at the federal level. And of course, beyond just the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, we've got a number of other hot topic programs out there infrastructure-wise that are available for our use. So we are going to open this up a bit. We're going to invite in a couple members of our community here. We've got Henry Wind from the California Water Service. We've got Eric Takaseyu from Southern California Edison, and Christie Moore of the Ferguson Group that are going to shed some light on this for us. But first up, what we're going to hear from Henry Wind. Henry is coming to us as the Director of Field Operations for the California Water Service Company. It's the third largest privately invested water provider in the US. He's responsible for the oversight of all field operations, budgeting, contract operations, capital improvements, regulatory agencies, water quality compliance, and water supply in the Cal Water Southern region, which includes East LA, Rancho Dominguez, Westlake, Bakersfield, Kern River Valley, and the Antelope Valley districts. Henry has more than 32 years of experience in the water industry. He holds a State Water Resources Control Board Water Distribution Grade 5 and Water Treatment Grade 2 certifications. Henry participates in Cal Water emergency response programs, including Wildfire Task Force. He leads the formation of an operations rapid response team and has functioned as the incident commander in various wildfire and emergency events across the company. With that, we're going to turn it over to Henry. Henry, take it away for us.
Thank you, Cole, for the introduction. And thank you all for having us. We're happy to talk a little bit about Cal Water and what we have done to prepare for and to respond to various types of emergency events as they occur, right? Thought I'd talk a little bit about the company just so you get an idea of what we're dealing with emergency response-wise. We've got a really diverse footprint. We serve in 4 states now. We just started an operation in the state of Texas as well. So I work for the California Water Service Company, which is our largest area. And geographically, we serve in various locations as far south as the Palos Verdes Peninsula and all the way up north to the city of Chico. So from a planning perspective, it's fun. We've got urban areas, we have rural areas, we've got high density, and we've got some systems that are quite remote. I thought I would start with trying to define what a water provider would consider an emergency. So this is what I came up with. An emergency to me is any event that could create an inability for me to provide safe, potable water for either domestic, industrial, firefighting purposes. Firefighting being key when we're talking about emergency response. And what kind of things could affect, our ability to provide water, right? Pretty broad if you start thinking about it. Wildfire, flood, earthquake, storm, those are pretty obvious. You just got done talking about cyber attacks, terrorist acts, supply chain issues. If you think about supply chain issues, if I can't get fuel, if I can't get parts and materials, now I can't provide water. Today, I thought I'd hit the top 3. For me, wildfire, earthquake, power outage. We've got a limited amount of time, so I'm going to just touch real briefly on what we've done to do, or how we've tried to prepare for each of these things. Right. So a little bit about wildfire to start with. These are real life examples. If you look off to the left here, that's a pretty scary scene. That's the Erskine fire that took place back in 2016 in our Kern River Valley district. That's Lake Isabella that you're looking over. I happened to respond to that event, and pulling into that valley at 4 a.m., seeing something like that was quite unsettling. So we really started kicking our wildfire prevention into high gear when things like this started to occur. And it's been almost 2 or 3 wildfires per year that we've dealt with since 2016. In the case of that Erskine fire, our facilities were not damaged. We were really fortunate that we didn't lose pump stations during that fire. But if you look at the picture on the bottom right where there's a utility pickup truck, that's one of our trucks driving through our customers' homes. Most importantly, you won't see any power poles or telephone poles. Everything was burned to the ground. So from a water utility perspective, if we don't have power because the poles are gone, we can't run our pumps, which means the fire department doesn't have water to put out the fire, and it's sort of this circular type of problem. So that's a bad day for us. Power is a big issue. We started preparing for wildfire by forming a cross-functional team within the company that took a look at all of our systems. What we did first is we identified the high-risk areas, right? We added fire hydrants. We replaced undersized mains. We looped dead-end mains and provided circular feeds. We added redundant supply sources whenever possible. We did things that I would think are a bit creative. And working with the LA County Fire Department, we added a connection within our Palos Verdes system here in Southern California that was near a helicopter landing pad so that they could have access to water and put out the fire and thus help us protect our system and continue to provide water. There were some operational strategies that got worked into our planning. I've got a picture there of some defensible space mapping. So all of our stations in years past, we tried to hide them, right? The neighbors didn't want to see that water tank or that pump house. Well, nowadays, we try to clear shrubs and bushes and trees and keep a good defensible space around all of our facilities so that they don't burn and they operate when we need them. The red flag warning is something that we put into place. It's a very simple thing. On a red flag day, we change our operating parameters and we increase the volume of storage that we keep in our water tanks to keep more water available when needed for our customers and for firefighting. Earthquake is another big one. If you think about water tanks, they're full of water, right? Doesn't sound real exciting until you have a big earthquake and the water inside of them starts moving around. It likes to slosh back and forth. It will damage the tank. It can knock them off of foundations. It can break the fittings where the tanks and the piping join. So that top center picture is actually a nice coupling for us. It's called an EVA iron fitting. It's got 2 knuckle joints, one on either side of the fitting that can move and in any direction. The center piece of this fitting moves in and out. And the idea here is that during an earthquake or any large event like that, the tank and the pipe will move, the fitting will take up the slack, and we can maintain storage and use that to feed our systems. The elevated tanks are another problem for us. In the Central Valley, especially where the topography is quite flat, our older systems have got elevated tanks. Those things, the base of the tank are about 120 feet in the air, 100 to 120 feet. If you think back to the water movement problem and the amount of stress that will be put on the legs of those tanks and those foundations, would that water start moving around from side to side? That's a real problem. So in this case, it was better for us to decommission most of those tanks and take them out of service. In some cases, they're still standing. They just don't have water in them. Main replacement programs are a big one for us. As a company, we've had a pretty aggressive main replacement program over the years, but we've changed the criteria for identifying which mains get replaced. It used to be, if a main leaks, we replace it. Now we look at a number of different things. One, the fire hardening projects that I mentioned earlier. A couple of other things. We look at liquefaction. We put in different types of joints there so that pipe sections won't separate in the event of a large earthquake that causes liquefaction. Fault lines, where we know that we're crossing fault lines, and if we can identify them and their exact locations, we put valving on either side of those mains so that in the event of damage to our water system, we can isolate that section. In addition, we'll install fire hydrants on either side of that fault or emergency connections so that would we have to isolate a section of critical main because an earthquake damaged it, we can install a temporary connection from side to side and at least keep the water moving and restore service as soon as we can. Let's look here. In California, we probably average about 30 miles of main per year, which is ever expanding. We would like to expand that program over time. Lastly, on the earthquake end, this year, actually, we commissioned another cross-functional team that we're calling the Earthquake Task Force. And our company is going to take a closer look at what we can do to enhance our, system hardening for earthquakes. Power outages, I mentioned, that's a big one for us. No power means no water. That's never a good thing. That's a bad day. So what we are doing now is we're looking at our system design a little differently. In years past, we provided for emergency power only at our really, really critical stations. And, we kind of viewed it as, well, if one area of town is out of power, the other areas will support it and we'll be okay. Nowadays, we're looking at our systems in their entirety, and we're planning for it and a system-wide outage. So if that happens, what are we going to do? How do we operate? We're adding more permanent generators. Those are pictures of a couple of sites that we have. The lower picture is in our Bear Gulch district in the San Francisco Bay Area. That's a portable generator that we rented, built some temporary containment, secondary containment on the bottom, and just stored that during last year's fire season there. So it was there in the event that we needed it. We've added manual transfer switches to all of our key stations so that we can roll up with a portable generator, plug it in, disconnect from utility power and switch to generator power as quickly as possible. Once again, maintaining service. So lastly, I'll kind of wrap it up with a little bit of emergency management a slide here. If I look at emergencies and as the water system operator, we plan, we build, we do lots of things, but at the end of the day, emergencies happen, right? There will be a fire, there will be an earthquake, there will be a flood. We've experienced all of these things. We can't stop them from happening, but we can certainly prepare to manage them. So we as a company have spent a lot of time preparing for that. I will kind of wrap it up now by just mentioning this emergency planning. We've got an emergency guidebook. We formed emergency rapid response teams. We embed ourselves in EOCs, and we host our own EOCs. That incident command structure has been invaluable to us in managing events, either small or large. So I'll just close with that. I think preparation is good, but that preparation also needs to include planning to manage the events when they happen. Try, if you can see my screen, to go to my contact information. It's not coming up on my end, but my information is hwind, HWIND, @calwater.com. Please feel free to shoot me an email if you have a question down the road. Let me know who you are and where you met me so that I don't think you're a salesperson, and I'll try to answer any questions that I can. So thank you for your time, Cole.
All right. Thank you, Henry. Much appreciated on that. Appreciate the insights and some of the items that you're doing best practices wise to try to track down some of that critical infrastructure in the face of emergencies. Appreciate that. Next up, we've got Eric Takaseyu, who's the Vice President of Asset Strategy and Planning at Southern California Edison. Eric joined SCE in 1991 and is currently the Vice President, as I mentioned, of the Asset Strategy and Planning Organization here at SCE. He leads business planning, electric system planning, asset management, technology, and wildfire mitigation work across operations for the utility. Prior to his current role, he served as Vice President of Transmission Substations and Operations. There, he was responsible for all substation and transmission construction and maintenance, grid operations, compliance, and emergency response and restoration. He also held several leadership roles in engineering, operations, and grid modernization throughout his career. This includes serving as managing director of the Integrated Innovation and Modernization Unit to develop the company's strategy and technical capabilities for the future electric systems to meet the state's ambitious decarbonization goals. Eric serves on the board of directors for several organizations, including the North American Transmission Forum, the Western Energy Institute, and Leadership Education for Asian Pacifics. He also serves on the Executive Advisory Committee for IEEE Power and Engineering Society. Eric earned a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering at California State University, Long Beach, and a master's degree in organizational leadership at Gonzaga. He is also a licensed professional engineer in the state of California. Eric, I'll turn it over to you for your presentation. Take it away.
Thank you, Cole. And what a great presentation to follow on. I think Henry did a really great job in laying out some of the issues and strategies on the water side. So I'll be covering the power side with that along similar lines. So one of my responsibilities is wildfire mitigation and wildfire mitigation planning. The issues here, it's interesting because, the realities in the face of climate change, at the end of the day, what we see is the consequences are just so much more significant than anything that we've seen before. If you just look at the history of wildfires, over several decades, and you look at when the largest wildfires have occurred, nearly half of the 20 largest wildfires since 1932 have occurred in the last 2 years, according to CAL FIRE. So that's just indicative of the severity and consequences that climate change has in our environment. Now, wildfire is one of our highest priorities, as well as safety. And so the thing that we look at is kind of, resiliency holistically across both climate change. You heard earlier today some of the challenges with cybersecurity and also physical security. So safety being one of our highest priorities, that is sort of informing all of the work that we do to ensure the safety of not just our workers, but our communities as our number one priority. We really appreciate the partnership of our, with our local government leaders on collaborating on public safety initiatives. I thank you for your commitment to addressing the threat of catastrophic wildfires. It clearly takes coordination and a coordination effort across multiple levels between local, state, and national to meet all these challenges that we're facing. Within Edison, similar to what you heard from Henry at the water side, we also have incident management as well. We even have our own fire management teams that work closely with fire agencies during critical events to ensure our response. About our service territory, 50,000 square miles or so across our entire territory, but 27% of that is considered high fire risk areas. And as you can see from this chart, there are different levels of severity threats in our service areas. So we have maps that are published by the CPUC also that took a while to evolve in terms of identifying these different threats. We also use the latest technology tools that help us also understand fire spread and fire simulation. So this helps us also to inform both our mitigation strategies that we use for our grid hardening and other mitigation work, as well as our emergency response. Now, last year, fire threat was extremely high, and as all of you know, we've been in and continue to be in significant drought conditions. The issue with that in terms of wildfires, we know, is it's sort of a stress on fuels. And when we think about just the size of fires that we've seen, Dixie Fire up north burning nearly 1 million acres, just indicative. But couple that with wind speeds, and our peak Santa Ana wind season typically starts in November. I'm sorry, in October, and extends all the way out to the early part of the year. But we also have the propensity or the potential of very large fires, even in non-windy conditions, because of these drought conditions. Now, last year, interestingly, the fire season was a little bit more quiet for us in terms of the number and the size that we saw. Part of that, we look at going back what might have been some of the contributing factors. We saw, because of drought situation, sometimes the grass crop isn't as significant as it might have been in previous years. But also we had the luxury of a little bit of moisture from monsoonal weather patterns that we saw that impacted the region in the middle of the year last year. But I will say that even though fire season might have been less active last year, we can certainly, I think, expect to see, unfortunately, more active wildfire seasons going forward with climate change. So wildfire mitigation, big part of our strategy is, as far as all the things that we're doing. We've been working under wildfire conditions, since I've started the company over 30 years ago, well before that. But when we think about what's needed for the future and how we need to evolve, we did focus essentially on these three sort of foundational areas. One is hardening our grid. The second is improving our operational practices, and I'll talk a lot more of that in detail. And the third is increasing our situational awareness. So we are making improvements across a number of different areas to ensure that the grid is more resilient. And when it comes to hardening the grid, the goal here is to really do all that we can to reduce the potential for the electric system to actually become a source of ignition to create an arc or a spark. So that really drives a lot of the key mitigations that you see here on the slide. One of, I would say, core to our strategy is actually changing the design of our overhead electric systems that traverse these high fire risk areas. So our long-standing industry standard is to use bare conductor on overhead systems. What we're doing now is we're replacing that over time with essentially what we're calling cover conductor. So think of bare wire now being replaced by wire that has protective layers. The technology that we're using now is the latest one that has various layers, but one of it is high density polyethylene that enables a lot more resiliency against contact with foreign objects, abrasion, things that, when you can imagine coming into contact with lines, can create those hazards like an arc or a spark. So by replacing this, it allows us to be more resilient in terms of the potential causes, but also, and I'll cover this in a little bit more detail around public safety power shutoffs that are also a measure of last resort. Cover conductor helps us mitigate those as well. So far, we have about 9,700 miles in total of circuit miles if you were to add up all of our systems on our distribution side. We've installed about 2,900 miles to date, and by the end of this year, that number will be about 40% of our entire distribution infrastructure in high fire risk areas. So we're going as fast as we can. It's the best technology available to buy down as much risk as possible in the most efficient way. Another really important mitigation here is inspections. Now, we've done inspections for years, right? But what we're doing today is what we call enhanced inspections, because technology really has come a long way. So what we do today is, we still do ground patrols where we send people out to look at our infrastructure, but we're also using a lot of aerial technologies, high resolution images that can come from helicopters and primarily drones today, because it's really important for us to get that 360-degree view of our infrastructure. what we use though is really high resolution images and other technologies that detect arcing and things like that. So these are historically really hard to see anomalies, but we're now able to capture those with the technologies that we're using. So we've completed about just over 200,000 inspections last year. Now, another issue that we also need to manage is vegetation around our infrastructure. So we do a combination of things. We assess trees that we call hazard trees that could directly fall into our lines. We clear vegetation around our infrastructure, and we remove hazardous trees. So last year, we removed about 3,400 trees that could have directly fallen into power lines. We cleared brush around just over 160,000 of our structures, and we're now starting to remove palm trees. By the end of this year, we'll have removed about 11,000 of those. The reason why I call that out is because we've seen palm fronds during windy conditions travel as several hundred yards, and they're sort of like parachutes in the wind, and they come into contact with our lines. And then when it comes to situational awareness, there's a lot of technology innovation that has happened here. So you think about how to detect wildfires, how do you, sort of understand the conditions in which they might occur. One example is we're using artificial intelligence to detect wildfires. So this is using artificial intelligence in conjunction with high resolution fire cameras that we have. We have about 166 of those spread in our service territory today to form kind of an alert wildfire camera network. Now, both fire agencies and people from the public can access these cameras. If you go to alertwildfire.org, you can actually see where the cameras are located and lock onto those and see what's going on. Wind speeds, I talked about that a little bit earlier. That is, the things that we're really concerned about when fields are dried out. We've installed over 1,400 weather stations spread out through our high fire risk areas today. This gives us really local wind speed conditions and also helps us forecast and predict wind speeds when they occur. So we've also added 2 supercomputers, and we're trying to drive the granularity of our weather forecast down to 1 kilometer resolution, which I think is really remarkable considering just how difficult it is. And then we're using machine learning on our weather stations. We're starting to pilot those to see if we can make our sensors smarter and smarter and give us more information. The last thing I'll say on this slide, it's actually listed here, is we could do all this mitigation work, but we also need really strong partnerships with our local and regional fire agencies. So one of the things that last year we contributed to is 18 million in funding to help provide these what is called the first ever quick reaction force. So these are 3 helitankers and a command and control aircraft that could be dispatched 24 hours around the clock to drop water, fire retardant, and last year they were dispatched to fight the Dixie Fire up north. So while our wildfire mitigation activities, these are all really great things, we do have a measure of last resort when all things, and we see imminent issues coming around from a safety perspective. We do have a measure called Public Safety Power Shutoffs, or PSPS. And all of you have heard about this, and we know that PSPS creates hardships for customers and difficulties. As Henry stated, even without power, water also becomes a really significant issue. So we're really working to reduce the need for it through the grid hardening activities that I mentioned earlier, and then a bunch of other things that we can do to try to mitigate the impact. So it is an approved measure of last resort, but we have been working to accelerate as much grid hardening as we can to drive down the need for PSPS. And you can see here on this chart the differences that this has made. Now, the delta between 2020 and 2021, part of that is due to grid hardening. The other part of that is due to the weather, like I stated. But even with that, these are the kinds of totals that we are looking to see going forward as we continue to drive this. Now, we filed an action plan with the CPUC, 132 steps to improve all things around our plan. And we're just something we're going to continue to do year after year. So there's a few new tools here that we have released as a result of those mitigation efforts. We have the Public Safety Partner Portal page, which is really a more efficient way of communicating the status of our PSPS events when they're occurring. We're working on doing a better job of more accurately and timely notifying our customers, but that's also coupled with some of the unpredictability that we've seen with the weather. So the more unpredictable the weather becomes, the harder it is to notify customers that these events are coming. And then also say here that we've been focused a lot on programs. And so one of the programs that I'll highlight is our Critical Care Battery Backup Program. This is where we have folks who rely on medical equipment, rely on electricity to power the medical equipment. And last year, we delivered over 6,000 batteries to all eligible medical baseline customers in our high fire risk areas. And to supplement that, we partnered with 211 to provide expanded services during these PSPS events. And then we try to dispatch community crew vehicles or open up centers to provide information when these events are occurring. So here's a list of available resources. I know there's a lot here, and that I was going to write down all these things, but these are all listed on our webpage. These are all the various things, items that I've talked about, but also other resources that can help both our communities and our customers through PSPS events, and also get more informed about wildfire. Now, I'll say that we talk about wildfire, and kind of what I'll close here is that, this is a journey, and this is going to be an important journey for quite a bit of time, and a real sense of urgency. One of the things that we're trying to do is understand, well, what does climate change look like in the long term? So, we talk about things like more precipitation, droughts, extreme temperatures, sea level rise. So what we're doing right now is we're looking at long-range models from 2030 to 2070 to get in a clue as to what kind of adaptation strategies we might take, and how what's the gap between our current design and what we need to do going forward. This is also about community resiliency as well. So disadvantaged, vulnerable communities, we just filed our community engagement plan with the CPUC in May 2021 that addresses a number of these issues. But looking at the future long term, I think this is all about evolution and rapid transition. So we are, fighting climate change on the front end is probably the most important thing that we could do, so we don't have as many consequences as we've seen. So we are accelerating our transition to our clean energy grid as quickly as we can. I would encourage folks, if you have time, to read our Pathway 2045 and our Reimagining the Grid white papers that are posted on our website, really highlighting what it takes to get to those 2045 decarbonization goals. Because as we become more reliant on electricity, it's extremely important for not only to meet those decarbonization goals, but to evolve the electric system accordingly. So once again, thank you for the opportunity to participate on this panel, and look forward to your questions.
All right, thank you so much, Eric. Appreciate that. Also quite insightful. A lot of hard work you all are doing at Southern California Edison to try to keep the lights on and everyone safe. So we definitely appreciate that. We're gonna move along here, and if there are any questions, we're gonna try to get to them in rapid fashion at the end of this session here. Please feel free to utilize that Q&A box. Happy to try to get to that right after Christie Moore, who is joining us from the Ferguson Group. Christie is a managing partner for strategic development at the Ferguson Group when she joined the organization in 2000. She specializes in transportation, water, economic, and rural development, law enforcement, and federal funding for local governments. Prior to joining TFG, she worked for a California state representative, the District of Columbia Office of Corporate Counsel, concentrating on legal and legislative issues concerning the abuse and neglect of children and the elderly, and the California Cattlemen's Association, focusing on land, water, and air quality concerns surrounding the beef industry. Christie is based in TFG's Northern California office and primarily works on behalf of local governments and public agencies in the Western U.S. Since joining TFG, Christie has concentrated on expanding the firm's services to small rural areas. She was born and raised in Inyo County, which is abundant in natural resources and federal land. So she understands how the rural counties and the issues that they face when addressing the needs for their citizens. Christie has worked to develop working relationships between Congress, federal agencies, and her rural clients. These relationships have benefited rural communities through direct appropriations, authorizations, grants, and regulatory relief, as well as contributed to the congressional offices gaining a better understanding of the unique problems and needs in rural America. She has a strong background in ag, water, and natural resources issues, and brings her professional experience in these issues from her work on behalf of urban, suburban, and rural clients. She also has a unique partnership of regional water purveyors for almost a decade, and they've worked collaboratively to balance water resources in the area, including developing strong partnerships with local and federal offices of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the Bureau of Reclamation. Christie received a BA in political science from the University of California at Davis. She completed the Water Education Foundation's Water Leader Training and has been an invited speaker on the federal appropriations process many times. Christie is the leader of TFG's local government practice management team, and she joins us now to shed some light on some funding opportunities and some hot topics on infrastructure funding. I now will turn it over to you, my trusted friend and colleague, Christie from the Ferguson Group. Have at it.
Thank you, Cole. I make sure I give you a shorter bio, but thank you for the intro. I am unfortunately not on video. My computer has decided to be really wonky today, so I think I've already gotten kicked out of the Zoom once, so I'm not going to tempt it by going on video today, so I apologize for that. But I wanted to kind of wrap up the panel here to talk a little bit about what is the hottest game in town, it seems like, in terms of infrastructure discussions and coming from Washington, D.C. I'm sure that many of you are very aware of the fact that Congress at the end of last year passed the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. This is a historic stimulus-driven piece of legislation, very much driven at infrastructure. It was bipartisan in nature. And the critical element here is that it authorized funding over the next 5 fiscal years, above and beyond, in most cases, what will be appropriated on an annual basis from Congress. But it would cover the 5 fiscal years, including this year, fiscal year 2022 through 2026. This is historic in nature in a variety of ways. It's not only in its size, it's 1.2, it should be trillion on this slide, $1.2 trillion in authorized spending for multiple modes of infrastructure. I won't get into too many of the details here, just in the interest of time to make sure that you guys have enough time for Q&A. But it's a combination of new spending as well as authorized spending, and in significant amounts. This is a distribution of where the funding is coming from and 13 different pots or categories of funding identified by the White House in a recently released guidebook that they put out on the infrastructure package. So you can see it's quite heavy on the transportation side. That was because the base bill for this was the transportation authorization bill. But it's significant to see congressional authority given over the next 5 years in the other categories, which I want to touch on a little bit as they relate to kind of the conversations that you guys have had earlier today. From the energy and power perspective, this is quote unquote one of the bigger winners out of the package. This is a distribution of the funding in terms of how much is just going directly to energy and power projects and programs. The significant thing here you'll notice is that 74% of this funding is actually new program funding. So the Department of Energy in particular, who is receiving the majority of the $74 billion, will actually have to develop the programs and put the programs together. Over here in the bottom, I popped up a similar pie chart that shows the distribution overall of how the funding is. The majority of the funding coming out of the IIJ is for existing programs, but in energy and public power or power in general, it is new programs. So we'll see a release of these programs, the development of these programs over time. There is a consideration for resilience infrastructure as well. This is a little bit more split. One of the key things to keep in mind here too is that even for the resilient infrastructure geared programs, there are still new. So again, they're in development. The federal agencies looking at resilience infrastructure programs will be rolling these programs out hopefully over the next year. But we could see some of it extend into the next calendar year as well, because it does take time to go through the process. On water side, because I know that there's an interest in water and building that resiliency, it's the complete opposite. Most of the funding going to water type investments on the infrastructure side is existing programs. That means that these programs just got increases in funding, changes or tweaks into their authority in terms of what they can address. This is actually less than 1% will actually be in new programs. Most of that new program funding is actually going to new storage for groundwater, multi-benefit type projects, which I think could be an interest to many of you who are trying to prepare for on the water side for more resilience and emergency preparedness. Strictly on emergency preparedness, FEMA did receive funding authorization under the IIJA. These are very big numbers for very big programs, but they're smaller programs in the way that this funding is distributed. But you can see that there's still quite a bit of funding that will go to FEMA to administer disaster relief funding, emergency preparedness in particular, looking at cybersecurity and critical infrastructure improvements, and then finally on the National Flood Insurance Fund, which is a whole other issue that typically has to get relief on occasion for the flood-prone areas of the country. So this is just kind of an overview of what we've seen come out of Washington in terms of new federal funding, either for new programs or on top of or increases to existing programs. Just listening to the conversation and knowing what you guys are all looking at in terms of building your resilience and looking at emergency preparedness, we have seen a trend on a variety of ways, even on the legislative front, from Washington, looking at ways to address FEMA's programs for emergency preparedness. There is significant funding in the hazard mitigation program overall, the new BRIC program, which is geared towards building resilient infrastructure. It's exactly what BRIC stands for, which is a new form of the hazard mitigation grant programs. For those in the state of California, a lot of that is being based on the amount of disasters that have occurred in the state. That's how FEMA gets a lot of its emergency preparedness and mitigation program funding. So sadly, for the state of California, that's a pretty significant number. And so we're continuing to see increases and significant funding available for local agencies and private agencies who are responsible for the state's infrastructure continue to get additional funding in that regard to be prepared for disasters and help respond to them. So just kind of a quick overview. I'm happy to answer any questions. I know that we're a little tight on time, so I want to open it up to Q&A and allow for time there.
Well, thank you, Christie. Appreciate that overview. There's billions and billions of dollars, as you can see here. And there's a lot more than just what we can hit on here in a couple minutes involved with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So we definitely appreciate that overview, Christie, and some of the insights that you have there. With that, I'm not seeing any solid questions coming into the Q&A box, and we are also a little bit over time into this coffee break. So with that, want to just appreciate all of you for joining us this morning, for your insights on best practices for infrastructure, critical infrastructure, and some funding opportunities coming down the pipeline on that. Again, we have with us this morning from joining us on the panel, We had Henry Wynn, the operations director for the California Water Service, who I must thank for this nice glass of water here that I'm having in Bakersfield this morning. Thank you. And Eric Tekasayu, who's the vice president of asset strategy and planning for Southern California Edison. And again, Christie Moore, a managing partner for strategic development at the Ferguson Group, providing all their expertise with us here this morning. So thank you all. It's been great joining you this morning. And thank you to the Southern California Edison, California Special Districts Association, and USC for putting this on this morning. Thank you.